Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you value the podcast and would like to help distribute it to other people, if you could take a moment and if you're watching on YouTube, if you could like the video and then subscribe and or comment, that motivates the YouTube algorithm to share it to more people. It's the primary way YouTube determines how widely to share the podcast. So thank you if you do that. If you listen to this through the podcast networks, you can go to our website, simplicityzen.com, and you can sign up for the mailing list there. My guest today is Korin Charlie Pokorny. He's a Soto Zen priest and was ordained by Tenshin Reb Anderson in 1999, and then received Dharma transmission from him in 2018. He studied koans with Daniel Terragno, under whom he completed the Harada Yasutani koan curriculum. He has a master's degree from Stanford University in religious studies, and he's currently a Dharma teacher at both the Brooklyn Zen Center, and is a member of the teaching facilities at both the Institute of Buddhist Studies in California and the Union Theological Seminary in New York. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. So right now, so you recently moved to Brooklyn, is that right?
Yes, 1 year ago.
And what was it? What brought you to Brooklyn? Was it the Brooklyn Zen Center, or was it the teaching at the theological?
The Brooklyn Zen Center was one of the main things that brought us here. We also were just ready to move to the East Coast to be closer to my partner's family, Sarah Emerson. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to move to a city where our son is adopted, and he's both of his biological parents are of Samoan descent. And so
you said your son, did you say?
Our son, yeah, our 11-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just wanted him, basically we wanted him in an environment that was not so white and white dominant culture. So Brooklyn seems, was one of the places we were thought of. And then we found this fit also with Brooklyn Zen Center needing teachers. So yeah.
So what does that mean to be a Dharma teacher there? Are you compare and contrast it, like say maybe what your relationship to like Green Gulch was, or you were what was your Zen Center in was it Sonoma or Marin or?
In Sonoma County in Sebastopol, Sarah and I taught at Stone Creek Zen Center with Jisho. Right. Yeah, Jisho was the founder, and I would say, it's in some ways, similar to Stone Creek Zen Center, non-residential center, giving Dharma talks, having teachers meetings, fairly involved in administration, and just leading services, offering ceremonies, being accountable for the spiritual practice and life, for this community.
And how many teachers do you guys have there that are like fully engaged in that sense?
Well, fully engaged at Brooklyn Zen Center is Sarah Emerson, my partner, and I. And then also Kosin Greg Schneider and Laura Laughlin, they kind of got this group started. The Brooklyn Zen Center started over 20 years ago, I think. And they're still very much involved, but their energies in some ways are focused on Ancestral Heart Zen Monastery, which is about in Millerton, about 2 hours north of the city. So their energies are more focused on the training, and that's a small residential Zen monastery. And so, but they're still very much, we're kind of very like interwoven. And so they regularly give talks, co-lead sessions, and so on.
And so you guys have no residential aspect of the Brooklyn Zen Center at all, is that correct?
That's right. In Brooklyn, no residential. Yeah.
So you live off-site?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you guys have daily Zazen or weekly Zazen? What's the schedule like?
We have weekday Zazen every morning. We have online.
Online. Okay.
Online on Zoom, yeah. So half an hour sitting, and then like a 15-minute service, 15-minute service, and then check-ins.
Okay.
And then we have a Saturday program in person, and it's at Christchurch Cobble Hill. So we don't have a dedicated space right now. We're using we're using a shared space that's part of a church.
I get it. Did you guys have a lease prior to COVID?
There was, yeah. And that was on Carroll Street, a beautiful, large, facility.
Because I thought I'd seen pictures of it.
Yeah. And that just, the cost of that, the rent is so high in Brooklyn, it just wasn't sustainable through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. What are the demographics of the Sangha like as far as ethnicity and ages and so forth?
Well, right now in the city, it's white dominant. It's, it's certainly, although, there's a wonderful contingent of BIPOC folk. Mm-hmm. And then, in terms of age, I think probably the median age is somewhere in the 30s, early 30s.
Mm-hmm. That's really young for a Zen center.
Yeah, some people in their 20s, we're among the Sarah and I in our 50s are among the older people in the Sangha. That's
amazing. I mean, at 50, I'm definitely one of the youngest at our local Sangha. Sangha.
And that was the case at Stone Creek Zen Center. Sarah and I were among the youngest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was part of a big change.
So Brooklyn Zen Center, it's kind of been on the periphery of my radar. It always seems like it was kind of a trend, like a cutting edge and reaching out to beyond just white upper middle class people as Zen practitioners. What do you guys do actively to engage with those populations?
Well, I think I would say it's right now. There's various things happening, and there's also we're kind of in a. I think it's like I think there's leading right up to the pandemic. There was a bunch of things happening, and there was some kind of some difficult things happened, and I would say that like there's still some processing from those things, and I wasn't there for that, so I don't actually have a full picture of those events. Okay. But we have a program called Undoing Whiteness: The Bodhisattva Path of Liberation. Mm-hmm. It's a 10-month program, and Sarah and I did that the first time it was offered about 2 years ago. And
who offers that?
It's offered.
Who generated it, and who's that?
People at Brooklyn Zen Center. Yes, especially Laura and
so it was a program specific to Brooklyn Zen. Brooklyn.
It's a program specific to Brooklyn Zen Center. It's structured around the paramitas.
Okay.
And the kind of 10 meetings once a month, mm-hmm. and kind of a group session, and then also small group sessions. The first iteration was for white identified people. The second iteration, I think there'll be white identified people, and then also opportunity for people of mixed race. Mm-hmm. And so that's a program that's I think it's a wonderful offering, and so we're getting ready to offer it again starting this October.
Great.
And earlier this year we had a three-part series on abolition and Dharma. Mm-hmm. Actually, that was kind of like, it was what's the word? It was kind of like an interreligious dialogue. So with the Father Mark, who's the pastor of the church where we meet, mm-hmm. he was involved, we were involved, and then the Sangha member kind of spearheaded it. And then also we had guest speakers each meeting. We've had a Undoing Patriarchy group, and I think that's getting ready to get started again. It's been kind of on a little break. Mm-hmm. And I would say also, like, we really just pay attention to we try to have this be something we're always attending to, especially like in making administrative decisions. Mm-hmm. We have a process for filling senior leadership positions and teacher positions and so on, where it involves like going to a Sangha council, and they're kind of for feedback and for consideration. And there's a group of senior students, the Zen students of color. And so they're meeting, and
that was my next question. Are there any affinity groups?
Right now we don't have an affinity group. I think we're moving towards one. I think it would be led by the Zen students of color. And so I think the feeling is really we're trusting their sensibility about when they're ready to do this, when it's ready to be offered.
Mhm.
And I think they're going through their own process of, well, what is that? How do we want to frame this offering? And putting a lot of care into that. I think there was a group, and I think that's where some difficult things happened that eventually led to basically that group dissolved.
Oh, I see.
And so it did not continue through the pandemic.
I see. Yeah.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we chatted a little bit before we started recording. So you've offered in-person koan training before.
Yeah.
Which might be unique for a Suzuki Roshi priest, I think, right? I guess Baker Roshi offered a little bit at one point.
Yeah, I don't know if people have offered it. Certainly, a number of my Dharma siblings, especially my senior Dharma siblings, did substantial study. Like Norman Fisher did a bunch of study. Galen Godwin did a bunch of study with Robert Aiken.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know if they've ever offered it though, and because I don't know if they had the. I think they were also, I'm not sure if they had the circumstances where they could finish the whole curriculum.
Right.
Yeah. So I did complete it with Daniel Terragno, and then when I was at Stone Creek, I offered that to a few students.
And so we mentioned offline that you might be open to offering it to people online as well. So maybe if there's the unique circumstances, someone's feels an affinity to Suzuki Roshi's lineage and is interested in koan, you might be the guy.
I might be interested.
You'd be open to doing it through Zoom with people.
Yeah. And I would say also that I came to koan study after I'd been ordained as a priest for 7 years. Soto Zen priest for 7 years, Suzuki Roshi lineage, and so my practice has always really been that that kind of feeling about Zazen. And so I did koan practice, but it was I would memorize the koan. I would drop the koan into Zazen occasionally, but I didn't do a lot. I did not in my kind of daily practice. I wouldn't kind of like chew on the koan as my sitting.
Yeah,
I did a 1-week retreat in Korea.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
That was cultivating Dao.
Yeah. So I sit a lot with the Soto group, and some of them know I do koans, and I think they don't know what to make of it. But the truth is, like, I've never stopped doing Shikan Plaza. Like, it's such a muscle memory. I don't think I could not do it even if I tried.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'll just as I'm getting closer to my koan meeting, then I'll what was the koan again? I'll actively ponder it or try to become it, kind of going up to the meeting. Like, I don't really, it's not part of my zazen, so to speak.
Yeah.
There was one exception. Like, of course, I did mu for a little bit during zazen, and then the Swarsa mu. Yes, that was a big hump for me. So that one I actually sat with.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I would say.
Yeah. I'm curious, what texture do you feel koans added to your practice that they wouldn't have been there otherwise? Like, clearly, the normative social Soto path can be a complete path. That's without dispute. But I'm curious, for your causes and conditions, what do you feel like koans added to your practice that you didn't have otherwise? Or maybe not didn't have otherwise, but maybe emphasize it at a deeper level. Yeah.
Well, I would say, one thing I would say is, like, we did, as part of my, training with Reb, we did study koans for years, but in this kind of, I kind of call it informal exposition, just like, it's like freely relating to the koan as a Dharma unfolding, like the way that Dogen might talk about koans. Right. And the way that, the Book of Serenity comments on the koan. And so that was very much part of my practice before doing the formal style. And I feel like for me, the formal style, I really appreciated it. I felt like it totally intertwined for me with Dogen's teaching on Zazen, and basically on kind of, for me, I really took it up as in terms of like practice realization.
Mm-hmm.
So, enacting the koans and being, very, kind of being kind of like a concrete way and verbal ways of doing this kind of nonverbal, thing we do in Shikan Taza or Zazen of just, enacting Buddhahood, so practice expressing Buddhahood.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that it was that turned out to be very rich, or that it actually fed back into like my sense of practice realization, and kind of fed it and thickened it, and also kind of brought some of that feeling of enactment into like more into like the realm of form, into like from the where because Zazen could be so. Zazen has a form, but it could also be the feeling could be so formless.
Yeah.
And
yeah. For me, some of it is just the practical. It kind of infuses energy into my practice. My shikantaza can be a little sleepy, maybe, and like whereas like the koans, it's almost like a battery of energy that's makes the texture of the practice a little more vibrant, so like a little more dynamic. Just for me, I'm not saying you can't have that without it, but for my causes and conditions, it was I really like that aspect of it.
Yeah, and I really appreciated it. I also felt I think because of my Soto Zen training, I didn't really kind of get into the idea that there was a right answer to the koans. Mm-hmm. So that was never my feeling. There was just like a kind of a passing answer, and that it had a function. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated these passing answers. I felt like they could illuminate points of being stuck, and they could illuminate some, they could bring up a kind of, some facets of intimacy that were, mm-hmm. I deeply appreciated it. Yeah.
And koans can be pretty good at, a lot of them have hooks, like dualistic hooks that are meant to snare you.
Yeah.
And so like when you find yourself snared on one of those hooks, like I think there's a little bit like, oh, okay, yep, there's that contour of my conceptual self being caught there,
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that for me, I think part of what I've really come to appreciate about Zen, maybe partially through the koans, and is this like non-duality. Practicing non-duality is not to be averse to duality. Mm-hmm. Just get, we don't try to get rid of dualities or avoid them. That would be really dualistic. Right. Part of how we actually practice non-duality is like totally get involved in these dualities, see how we're stuck, and illuminate them, illuminate our stuckness, illuminate the grasping.
Cool. Could you talk a little bit about the scholastic teaching, or not scholastics, or like you teach in a academic is the word I'm looking for, like kind of the academic teaching you do. Can you talk about what you're doing now these days?
Yeah, well, I've been one of the main courses I've been teaching is ritual practice in Mahayana Buddhism, or ritual practice in East Asian Buddhist traditions.
Is this in the Berkeley?
This is at Berkeley and at Union.
Oh, you did take class at both. Okay.
Ritual class. Yeah. And I really loved kind of getting really deep into ritual practice. I think I didn't come to Zen for ritual, but that was such a strong part of how Zen was practiced at San Francisco Zen Center that it became a deep part of my practice. And then I was at Tassajara for a bunch of years, and during the practice period, it's a very ritualized life. Mm-hmm. And so I have these really deep feelings about ritual and deep appreciation, and then to teach it is really is wonderful. And there's and also to appreciate that there's like ritual theory, and ritual theory actually it can kind of illuminate some of what's happening in practice in ways that people in practice don't often talk about. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing also about this class is that it's not just Zen. So I'm always trying to learn about what's happening. What do Pure Land people do? What do Tendai people do? Shingon, what's happening? What's Chinese Buddhist ritual like? What was it like 200 years ago? what is Korean Buddhist practice, Vietnamese Buddhist practice. So
you haven't accidentally lit your apartment on fire researching this stuff, have you? I'm talking about like the ceremony where they put all the sticks.
No, but we actually for New Year's, we combined the idea of the bonfire, but then it was raining here and cold, so we were indoors. But it wasn't really a fire ritual, but it had elements of a fire ritual. And
but I've seen the videos, and like the flames are going up to these like wood ceilings. And I'm like, oh my god!
Yeah.
But they've obviously done it thousands of times. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, but also most of these wooden temples eventually, the vast majority haven't survived over the centuries. Yeah, no, I really appreciated that topic. I also teach a class just Zen Buddhism, like a survey course that's at Institute of Buddhist Studies, and it's especially they have a Soto Zen certificate, so it's really like a history and topical overview of the whole Zen tradition. Soto
Zen certificate. Could you expand on that a little bit?
It's like a certificate of academic study. It's like I think it's a 1-year program.
Okay.
So it's like a less of a commitment than like a master's degree or an MDiv, and then the Institute of Buddhist Studies was founded, I think, in like 1949 as a Pure Land Jodoshin Buddhist Seminary. Mm-hmm. So and so for many years, basically, I think it was basically for Pure Land Buddhist ministers.
Interesting.
But then in the last 20 years or 30 years, they've to Buddhist studies. They've opened the chaplaincy tracks, mm-hmm. and now they also have tracks in, I think, Theravada and Soto Zen.
Interesting. And the people who are taking the Soto Zen certificate, are these typically monks that are doing it as part of their monk training or the priest training, or like
mostly. Yeah. Although some lay people are doing it.
Really interesting. And so, all right, so let's transition to kind of your practice history a little bit, if that.
Sure.
Okay. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chicago. Okay. My parents were both at the University of Chicago in the South Side in Hyde Park. And
they were professors?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And they, there is like this, there's a Pokorny lineage. My grandfather and my grandmother were both lawyers in the same office. And then my dad and my mom were both professors of basically visual science in the same office their whole career. Mm-hmm. And now my partner Sarah and I are Dharma teachers together, and we usually like at Stone Creek, there was an opening for a teacher, and we applied as 2 people for 1 position. So a package deal.
2 for the price of 1.
Yeah, so it's somehow it's become a family tradition.
And I guess the students kind of self-select who they engage with better,
Yeah, we're very different, and so we resonate with different people. And
does she have Dharma transmission?
She does. She received Dharma transmission from Galen Godwin.
Okay.
But technically, Sarah is my Dharma niece.
I see. That's funny. Does she call you uncle?
No, we
Uncle Charlie.
jokingly refer to each other as our apprentices and our teachers.
Right. So I'm guessing college professors, it wasn't a very politically conservative environment you grew up in.
Well, I would say, like middle of the road. My parents were liberal, and mm-hmm. and in some ways, they had some really progressive, edges to them, which I appreciated. I don't have very good memory of it, but I was very young. Artists, they would just put up artists. We had an extra room in our house, mm-hmm. and the artists would live with us. Yeah.
Cool. What was there any religious tradition at all?
There was really, really none. Mm-hmm. And so that was actually, and I would say my mom was probably agnostic, and my dad was pretty not like almost like anti-religious, like really was, I think, just was felt vexed by religion, and so actually part of, you know, the early seeds of me coming to the Dharma were maybe 9 or 10 years old. I became very clear that I was going to die, and it was a big problem for me, and it would keep me up at night. And I had a really, and in some ways that, you know, that it never stopped bothering me. And so, until I got to Tassajara, and then it didn't stop bothering me, but it felt like, well, I don't have any question about doing something else now. Until that point, it was like, you know, you're going to die. You probably should be doing something else with your life. And yeah.
What was your nature as a kid and teenager? Were you sporty? Were you bookish? Were you introverted, extroverted?
Very introverted, yeah, and very lonely in high school, especially. And I did sports, but it wasn't like a big part of my identity. I was very good at math and science. And went to MIT for college, and I was also really into music. And actually, that became, you know, in college, I did a ton of music. And
if I remember, you got an undergraduate degree in some sort of music, right?
Yeah, music composition undergraduate at MIT. Yeah, so you're not supposed to go to MIT to study music, but that was my path.
What kind of music captured you as a teenager and college student?
Actually, everything. Almost everything. And so I would write classical and avant-garde music. I played in jazz, blues, rock, punk bands, sang in the choir. Yeah, so I really loved almost all music.
After you got to know Kokyo Hinkle, did he ever drag you to a Grateful Dead concert?
No. but yeah, no, we never made it.
For both Kokyo and I, the Grateful Dead was our gateway to practice, as weird as that sounds. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you, so did you, I mean, for me, music, I don't think it's an accident. You know, I think we have like purposely, you know, designed brain machinery to like music, right? And I think the reason we've evolved that or whatever is because it's, you know, spiritually transcendent. I don't think people see it in those terms often, but, you know, there's something inherently healing and communally bonding about music and the rituals around music. You know, I mean, because, you know, nature doesn't waste energy. You know, like if humans are doing it, there's a reason for it. And, you know, I don't think it like is invented by culture. Like it exists across cultures that don't even know each other, right? Yeah. And so something intrinsic to being a human, in my theory, is, you know, mostly just experiential, is that, you know, it's inherently transcendent and a spiritual activity. I mean, did you ever have a sense of that doing it, or like what?
I would say my sense of it, my sense of what music is in a way is I mean, it could be spiritual, but I would just say like connection and communication, but not communication. Like there's like communication, like one idea of communication is like very like verbal based, of like I've got some information and then it comes from me to you. But I would say that's like the kind of the most graspable form of communication, but that there's much more basic kind of communication that's just being together in the moment, and like, and that actually, you know, this verbal communication doesn't actually have any context or meaning without this, that we're actually here together. And I feel like there's something for me about music and kind of like how we're together in a moment, and or even, you know, if there's a piece written 200 years ago and it was performed 20 years ago, there's still some share of the flux of human life happening across these centuries, and it's I feel like kind of a human connection. human, and a kind of communication that, you know, we can't actually put into words. So we have music, and I feel this with ritual too. Actually, that ritual is it's like a communal activity, and I feel like it has all this like tremendous power because of its as a social activity, a social embodied activity that there's all kinds of communication happening, all kinds of connection happening.
Did you do you get a jolt from live performing or performances that you don't get from recorded? Is that part of your experience?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How about now as a Zen priest? Can you look back and realize music was having some sort of like flow or samadhi effect on you that was appealing?
I certainly flow, and certainly like places of like relief from my kind of habituated patterns of grasping a self and so on, and like kind of greed, hate, and delusion. You know, so yeah, I could see it as relief. Although I think for me, I don't know if I saw music as a path. As a path of transformation.
Yeah, I wasn't asking that, but I'm just saying, looking back, do you see that your brain was doing that, and that was part of the appeal?
Yeah, for sure.
It, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of in Tulsa Harada, there is music's not allowed. You're not supposed to listen to music or play music, and so this was a really big deal for me. My first year there, I had a lot of dokusan's about music, and
maybe you could just be do-on, and then you get a little bit of.
Well, eventually I was do-on. And but in that first year I really meditated on music quite a bit, and what music was really actually kind of radically expanded for me, from, you know, to sound, and then beyond sound, just to like you know, walls and tables, and you know, a lot of things became music for me.
Cool. So you're about my age, so I've talked to a few people from our generation. Star Wars, in retrospect, I realized was a pretty big influence in me in kind of getting interested in Zen. This, like the ethos of, you know, let go of thought, Luke, you know, trust your feelings, you know, like let go of conceptual approach, you know, that, I think that planted a seed. I'm curious, you being from a similar generation to me, if you had any of that.
I love Star Wars, but for me, the seeds that led to Zen, the first seed actually was Franny and Zoe, which I read in high school by J.D. Salinger.
I'm not familiar.
It's J.D. Salinger. It's basically a story. And Franny and Zoe are part of this family where the older siblings tried to raise the younger siblings as basically as spiritually enlightened beings from young childhood.
Interesting.
And it's kind of a disaster. And but there's all sorts of like kind of references to spiritual truth in there, spiritual truths and traditions. And for whatever reason, the Zen ones caught my interest, and then that led me to like the high school library, to D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts. That's all we had.
This is in high school.
Yeah. And so I read them, and I really actually resonated deeply with it. But in the books that I read by those two authors, there was nothing practical. There was nothing they didn't talk about meditation or meditation instruction. And so there was nothing to do. And so it remained elusive and out of reach, and just like something that like was wonderful, but like wasn't sure how to connect with it directly. And then my last year in college, I got really interested. I did start doing a lot of reading again around Zen, and but then also like other stuff too. And
what other kind of stuff?
I was reading some Sufi books. I was reading transpersonal psychology, some Native American books,
like shamanism.
Yeah, and so like a really
Blackout speaks.
Really, yes, yeah. So really wide variety of stuff, and that was my last year in college, and at the very end of that year, but anyway, I made July and August. I had this like vivid realization that I was making my own religion. I was making my own spirituality out of this like kind of, eclectic reading I was doing. And that my own religion, the religion I was making was just going to perpetuate my prison.
Like Charlieology.
Yes, Charlieism was going to was not going to lead me to liberation. And so I had this very powerful feeling of like I need to find a tradition and put myself in it. This was what felt right for me. And
Did you have friends who were into spiritual stuff or mystical stuff?
No,
I really all on your own. Yeah.
This is really on my own. And moved to San Francisco, and I did basically with that intention to try traditions. And once I found one, to put myself in it. And so San Francisco Zen Center was the first thing I found, and I was like, I thought, oh, this is a good enough fit, and so I kind of put myself in it. And
what for San Francisco specifically to have access to different traditions?
Partially, yeah. And partially, I was just ready for a big change, and I had a friend who lived there, so I had a place to land. And then I looked, I found a place to live, and yeah.
Did you get a job there?
I ended up taking classes at SF State, and then went to Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you started Stanford prior to finding San Francisco Zen Center, or was it kind of concurrent?
No, I started sitting at San Francisco Zen Center in like August of 91. And then I went to Stanford starting in the summer of 92. Yeah, so I went to Stanford. I actually, after I'd been at Stanford for about 3 or 4 months, I realized I should have just gone to Tassajara. But I was there, and I decided to finish it, and that's kind of like part of my character. That if I start something, I'll make a big effort to finish it.
Mm-hmm. At this point, were you thinking of being a religious studies professor, like going in academia?
I really wasn't sure. I was kind of I think I didn't know, but I think I thought of Stanford as a place to see, like, to learn more about Zen, to learn about the history, and then to see, like, if I wanted to do more of an academic direction with that, or more practice. Mm-hmm. And I really felt like I wanted to do practice, and it was a really nice kind of rounding out of my education, because at MIT I did music and science, so I wrote notes and I did a lot of math and science papers, but then Stanford was all like these, humanities, all reading and writing.
Mm-hmm. But what was your do you do a thesis for master's? What's the right word?
No, we don't. Sometimes you do a thesis, but it's in this program there was no thesis. It was just courses, and mostly my courses were with Carl Bielefeld and Bernard Four, and then there was another teacher there, Lee Yearley.
These were actually your teachers?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. They've all read some seminal Zen history books.
Yes. Yeah. No, I was part of the reason why actually, my next door neighbor in Chicago was a religious studies professor in Theravada Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of recommended some places to apply. And he said, for a Zen person, you can't do much better than Stanford.
Were any of these professors, I've always wondered, are any of them practitioners?
Well, let's see. I feel like Carl definitely was. Mm-hmm. He was a student of Suzuki Roshi. And then I think at Stanford, I think he was sort of an underground practitioner a little bit. I think there might have been some kind of, it wasn't necessarily a hard line, but there was kind of an ethos sometimes in kind of the more academic religious studies departments, not to publicly be a practitioner.
Right. It's almost like what's the right way to phrase this? Like, you don't want the appearance of being too biased.
Yeah. And so it's like you're an objective scholar, right. And so But I think he was kind of a secret practitioner. And I think
I
Bernard,
didn't realize he had a connection to Suzuki Roshi.
yeah. I think Suzuki Roshi might have been. Anyway, I think Suzuki Roshi actually might have wanted to ordain him as a priest at some point.
Interesting.
And I think Carl's wife said no.
So while you were at this, was it a 2-year program?
Yes.
And while you're concurrently practicing at San Francisco Zen Center.
Well, yeah. When I was at Stanford, I didn't have a car, so I was mostly practicing on my own.
Oh, interesting.
And it's actually very, very difficult.
When you first went to San Francisco Zen Center, what were your kind of walk us through? You walk through the doors. What was your first impression?
Well, let's see. It was, in those days, it was a little bit cold. People didn't really take much notice of you or talk to you very much. Mm-hmm. I think I waited in the wrong place for about 10 minutes, and then someone said, "Are you here for Zazen instruction?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, it's already happening." So then I went downstairs and joined that. And I remember they probably had talked about the Han, the signal to come to Zazen, mm-hmm. But I missed that. And so I didn't understand the Han for like months. It was kind of, yeah, I think over the years, the culture at San Francisco Zen Center and at Tulsa, it can change quite a bit as who's living there changes, and so it was sort of a cold time, or, not the Hillary, she was super welcoming. Mm-hmm. And she started funneling me into like being Jiko and carrying the incense and also ringing the bell in the morning called Shoten.
So you went pretty early then. I mean, you went pretty regularly while you were there then. That
first year I lived in San Francisco, I went every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was your first moment of Zazen, your first moment meditating in your life? Had you done any on your own?
I had found Sekida's Zen Training. Mm-hmm. He does offer Zazen instruction in there, and with some unusual breathing techniques, but basically it's basic meditation instruction. And so I had been doing that for a little while before I went to San Francisco Zen Center.
Did sitting at Zen Center feel differently?
I think I really appreciated the support of doing it with a group. I really appreciated doing it with the support of teachers and practice leaders. Mm-hmm. And I could feel that like this is good. This is a much more practical way to do this. And yeah.
Who was the first person you kind of had a teacher relationship with?
Well, I thought, I met with a bunch of teachers in San Francisco Zen Center that first year. I remember I met with Mel Weitzman, Blanche Hartman, Michael Wenger, and maybe like one or two other people. And but Reb would come. Reb was at Green Gulch, but he would come give talks, and I felt the resonance with Reb immediately. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really have a teacher until I moved to Tassajara, and Reb came down for practice period, and I started seeing him regularly and developed received the precepts from him and so on.
My first sesshin was actually around that time with Reb. It was, I don't know if this rings a bell for you, but it was a Green Gulch sesshin, but they held it at City Center because Green Gulch was renovating their Zendo.
Oh yeah.
Does that ring a bell? Were you at that one by chance?
I was not there for that one. I was not there for that one. But
that was I went into it. I think my entire previous Zazen experience was sitting one half day sitting. I thought like, well, that wasn't bad. I could do a 7-day one, and somehow they let me into the 7-day sesshin, and let's just say I was a little unprepared for that.
Yeah, my early sessions, part of the reason I didn't go to Tassajara was because I found the sitting very, very challenging. Mm-hmm. Physically, just my knees and my back, and then eventually my ankles and my neck and my wrists and my jaw, and everything would be hurting.
Eyebrows.
Yeah.
So what your major great doubt, so to speak, was basically existential stress. sounds like, right?
Well, like, I would say, yeah, I'd say like, what in terms of what brought me to practice this problem of death,
Mm-hmm.
death, and like, and how I think what, I mean, as a child and a teenager, that that here was the one fact that was kind of everybody shared unquestionably, definitively, and then it's like so denied in the culture and the conversations in daily life.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this super unintegrated but seemingly really, really important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the disintegration of that whole situation kind of drove me nuts. And I didn't know how to integrate it. I just knew, I was just very aware of this disintegrated truth. And because it was disintegrated, it would kind of disrupt, like, any idea I had about like my direction in life would really get disrupted by this.
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah. And like, I don't, and also my habits, like I'm kind of a fear type. So so fear is really big for me. And, but my fear didn't make any sense when the scariest thing that could ever happen was definitely going to happen. And again, like the disintegration, like I didn't, it was like disruptive. But in some ways, very positive disruption. But it was like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember I was at around that era, actually, I was at a Dharma talk with Blanche Hartman, and she said something like, when you realize you're going to die, the most reasonable thing you can do is sit down, or something like that,
Uh-huh. Well, I felt like dedicating myself to being present in a really full and deep and complete way, to me felt like that was like, that was the one thing I'd heard of that was like, okay, I'm meeting the truth of death.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to die.
Sense that there was some
be here fully.
Yeah.
Be here fully, and meet whatever you have to meet to be here fully. Work through whatever you have to work through to be here fully. That's meeting this truth of death. And then also just over the years, just really, there's like the truth of death, and then there's also like the ideas about death that weren't the truth of death. They're just my ideas. So I had ideas when I was a child, and they're based on being a separate self and so on. And so I had to just kind of also just work through like my own.
So like some rumination type stuff.
Yeah, kind of ruminate, and just like developing insight and working, and really appreciate Dogen's teachings. And Reb also would teach on non-separation of life and death. And like, yeah, I think as a child, I really saw death as separate from life. And now I think I have this, deep appreciation that like death is the nature of life. It's like, it's right in there. It's not coming from outside. And for me, that's, that letting that insight like deepen and is really important.
At this stage of your practice, did you have any explicit ideas of enlightenment or a desire for it, or were you thinking in those terms?
I was not actually, not so much. I mean, I think I wanted, in terms of, I didn't necessarily need it in terms of my problem with death. And then that sometimes the discourse at San Francisco Zen Center really discouraged like gaining idea. And so I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm here to give myself to this tradition. I'll give that up. I think sometimes it can go a little far, or I think sometimes it could be like I would say that no gaining idea is this kind of attitude. It's not like a factual statement that there's nothing to gain or that there's no awakening. It's just like, how do you practice?
A technique.
Yeah. A technique or like a practice and or spirit and or what awakening does. Awakening doesn't have gaining idea, and so it's like, you want to live awakening, give up your gaining idea, and then you're living awakening. So as opposed to being like, like almost feeling like, I think some people would feel like, they would have a big opening and then they couldn't even talk about it because it was like, it wasn't supposed to happen. And what are you going to do with that? Right. So, yeah.
Do you, So just jumping ahead a little bit. So as as someone authorized to present koans, something unique to koans that isn't really in kind of orthodox Soto these days is the teacher has to make a determination of when to move someone past mu into the curriculum, right?
Yeah.
And that criteria seems to vary significantly based on teacher and tradition and so forth. I'm curious, you as someone potentially who has to decide whether to move someone into the curriculum, like, are you looking for someone to have an explicit awakening experience, or like what? And if this is not something you want to talk about publicly, that's fine too. But what role do you think awakening plays in that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I tend to think of it. Well, I tend to look at it as a conversation, and a kind of feeling out. And I'm kind of shy, actually. I think about using the word awakening. In some ways, I'm more comfortable just saying openings.
Okay.
And then, like, I don't have to worry about whether it's awakening or not. And right. I'm also very much appreciate Suzuki Roshi saying, like, there aren't awakened people. There's awakened activity. And so I kind of feel like really important just to hold kind of an expansive sense of awakening, of how it lives. I think sometimes there can be a big opening, a big subjective or transsubjective appreciation of the truth of relationship or emptiness. But then even aside from that kind of opening, when there's generosity or when there's deep kindness, that that's the activity of awakening. So it's like it's living there. And so for me, like, the more interesting question is like, it's like, how does awakening live through my life right now? How does awakening live through my practice? So I feel like I'm not, so like that's my training also, and no gaining idea. I'm not really that interested. I mean, I don't actually see it as really pivotal to get something or not. More as like, is that what, how am I acting? How am I manifesting? What am I offering to the world? And yeah.
So let's say you have a student who comes with you and says, I was putting my key in the door and something kind of weird happened, and and so they have this opening, like, and they're asking, how do I work with this? What do you tell them?
Well, I actually have I feel like a little bit of a split in that in one sense. I say, like, well, the best way to take care of that is like just let go of it. Like, the way to take care of a big opening you've had is don't carry it around with you and don't try to get it again. Just release it. Or if you're carrying it around, then practice with that problem, and work, and investigate that grasping. And I feel like big openings, they are resources, like, and so we don't just like trash them. And so
it could be like a beacon in a way,
I think there's a way to take care of them without kind of grasping them. And I feel like, and so I think, like, like you can, like, have this resource, and then, like, you could read, like, The Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, and just let those words resonate with the feeling of that opening, and see what happens. For that, just as an example, like, so see, I wouldn't want to try and get rid of it, but just don't try to carry it around.
How about conversely, a student comes to you and says, I've been sitting for 10 years. I'm way more present with my life. I'm not ruminating as much as I used to, worried about as much as I used to. Things have really settled down. I feel like a connection with the universe, but I feel like I'm missing something from my practice. I haven't had what the books say can happen. Like, how do you counsel that type of student?
I would say, like, take the inquiry into the sense that something's missing. So go as deeply as possible into that feeling. really check it out, really become thorough with where does that live in your body, and kind of really, what is it, what's there, and what's around it, what's holding it, what's holding it in place, whatever its roots.
That's great. So kind of back to your story, at what point did you decide you want to kind of dive both feet into practice?
Well, so again, like after I'd been at Stanford for 5 months or less, I think I realized I should just go. I should have just gone to Tassara, but I was like, well, I'm going to finish Stanford, and so then I finished Stanford. I was very clear I did not want to do like a PhD and do reading and writing, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. It just was not how I wanted to spend that much of my life. Mm-hmm. And so a week after graduating from Stanford, I moved to Tassajara, and actually I had a girlfriend. We'd been together for about a year, and she went to Tassajara 7 weeks before me. And in those 7 weeks, we had this very close relationship. And then by the time I got to Tassajara, it was over for her. Like she'd fallen out of love with me completely.
Wow. So I'm taking it's not your current wife then.
She broke up with me the day I got there. Yeah, no, this is not Sarah. Yeah. So she broke up with me the day I got there, which was kind of a brutal way to enter a community.
So that was an emotional Tongario.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the normative way to get to Tassajara is you need to do practice periods in City Center or Greenville first before they let you go to Tassajara. Did they kind of waive that for you, or was that not a thing back then?
It was a thing. And I had done a practice period as a non-resident at the city.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of was and I'd done a couple, and I did a sesshin as part of that practice period. I'd done a 7-day sesshin with Reb, so I think I might have been kind of marginal, mm-hmm. But I think the fact that so then I stayed there that whole summer with my ex-girlfriend, and then she went.
You were there for the work period then.
I was there for like June through September. Okay. Of that summer, right? So right after I graduated from Stanford, went straight to Tassajara for the 3 months of the summer, and we were there together all summer. And then she went to Green Gulch, and I think there was a feeling of like, well, let's let Charlie stay at Tassajara so he doesn't have to be around his ex-girlfriend anymore.
Is she still part of the practice community? You don't have to name who this was.
She I don't think she has a little bit of connection to San Francisco Zen Center. I think still not a lot. Like the last time I saw her, actually, I gave a talk at Green Gulch, and she just happened to be there.
Okay. Yeah. Did you give her the stink eye? I'm just joking.
No, we were okay. That summer was rough for me, but then she came back and did a practice period about 5 years later. And by that time we just had dear friendship.
Great. So, so you went to your practice period, your first one there. Was that were you ready for it? Did it hit you like a ton of bricks, or?
It was really, kind of like it was big for me. Yeah, no, it was very, very difficult, and I went through a lot. And in some ways, I feel like it was like the most intense practice period about just in terms of like. Mm-hmm. Moving from point A to point B, like so much happened in that practice period of like suffering and liberation. Mm-hmm. Like all like the most dramatic highs and most dramatic lows were kind of in that first practice period.
How did you conceive your relationship there? Did you see yourself like, this is my first step towards being a monk, or were you thinking like, I'm going to do this before I resume my career, or were you not even thinking about it, just taking it a day at a time?
I was not sure. I was kind of like checking it out. So like I had applied to a psychology program, and I deferred to do the practice periods, thinking that if I could go there in a year. Mm-hmm. And I ended up staying at Tassajara for as long as I could, and so it wasn't positive it was going to work, or that it was good, that the fit was going to be right. And although I've talked to friends who met me or knew me back in that first summer, and they said, we all knew you were going to be around for many years.
You said that look in your eyes.
Yeah. So I was a very serious student.
Was it pretty clear pretty quickly Reb was teacher?
I felt a really deep resonance with him from the first time I heard him talk, and then and then that just got deeper and deeper the more I heard him talk.
At any point, did you say like, "I want you to be my teacher," or was it just kind of implicit?
I think I had a feeling like he wasn't interested in that as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked to receive the precepts, and I did. So
that first practice period.
Yeah, and then maybe 3 or 4 years later, started having conversations about becoming a priest.
So for him, like, being his student means being a priest, it sounds like.
And well, I think you could also, I think for him, I think also just like, it was sort of like, we can meet and you can learn from me, and like, and we can do that many, many times. And so like being his student, I think you could be his student without being ordained, but you might not, but you don't have to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think there is a way in which I think if you have become a priest with him, I think he does feel accountable as your teacher, and maybe in a different way.
Doesn't he have a rule? You have to live with him for 5 years prior to ordination, you think?
After ordination.
After ordination. Okay.
Yeah.
And
which I didn't quite do. But I tried. I kept trying to live at Green Gulch, and I kept bouncing back to Harada.
Okay. And so how long did you stay at Harada once you visited there?
Well, let's see. I lived there for a total of 8 years.
Contiguous? Not contiguous.
Not continuous, yeah. So over about a 12-and-a-half-year period, 8 years were at Harada and about 4 or 5 years at Green Gulch, but bouncing back and forth 3 times.
Mm-hmm. And it was the bouncing back because they just needed some more bodies to like work in the kitchen or whatever?
It was kind of complicated. Each time was a little like the first time I just wanted to move back, so I moved back. The second time,
ordination?
That was before ordination.
Okay. And
then let's see, the second time I moved back, I'm pretty sure Sarah and I lived at Green Gulch, and Sarah was like, I want to move back to Harada. So we moved back. And then we went back to Green Gulch, and then it wasn't really moving back, but I went back for one last practice period to be head student.
I see. Under Reb?
With Reb, yeah.
How soon? So after that, so you went there that first summer. How long until you knew you wanted to be a priest or be a monk? I guess would be a better way to say it.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't have a clear sense of when I knew that. Probably like a year or 2.
Okay. And then did you tell Reb right away once you knew that?
I think I didn't start having a conversation until I'd been there 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how did you feel the experience of practice was? So when you're at Green Gulch versus Harada, did practice feel very different to you?
It did feel quite a bit different. Well, one thing I felt was Harada kind of like there wasn't really anything else happening. Like there's a community of people there, and the outside world is so inconvenient, that during the summer you might go out on a day off, but it's kind of a long day of getting over the mountain and coming right home. And so your life is really in the valley. And so I felt like when I gave my life to the community, I felt met, and I felt like everyone was really there for this Zen practice community.
So like intense camaraderie, basically, right?
Yeah, real strong community feeling. And Green Gulch it felt, it was more, and like city center even more, like in the world. And so like people's energies were kind of going in and out of the valley, and I didn't feel met in that same way. I didn't feel like when I gave myself into this community of practice that there was a lot of people left there to meet me there full time.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, I had a hard time. For me, Green Gulch was more difficult, more challenging practice. Yeah.
Interesting. Which I guess is has value in and of itself.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
And so once you wanted to be a monk, did he give you a curriculum, or like he's like, that's fine. Of course, I need you to practice, but I also need, I want you to read this sutra and this sutra. Was there any sort of like curriculum at all, or like ritual expertise he wanted to see, or?
Yeah, no, he did want to train. He did want us to train in being doshi and train in. We spent quite a few years studying funerals. Mm-hmm. And so there was ritual training he wanted, and being able to chant some of the Dharanis in Japanese, with correct pronunciation and with kind of
memorize, of course,
with ease. Yeah.
Were you expect to have memorized all the chants?
It was not a expectation, but I did ask. So I did ask him before I ordained as a priest. I asked Reb, what should I study? And he said, you could memorize the Lotus Sutra. And so I that was what I did for the next 3 years.
Wow.
For myself I memorized like the first maybe 17 chapters. And then I think I became Tenzo, and I couldn't keep it up. Like Tenzo was so demanding of as a job that I couldn't. So I basically kind of lost those first 17 chapters, and then I started memorizing again, and I just picked up where I left off. Mm-hmm. And so then I never had the whole sutra in my mind at one time, but I had like in these big chunks.
Interesting. I have a hard time just memorizing a koan. Imagine. What did your parents think about all this? Were they a little dismayed that their son was going off and becoming a monk?
I think they were pretty concerned at first. I think they were worried and maybe
like, what's he
uncomfortable.
doing?
I think a nice thing about Tassajara was they could come as guests. So after I'd been there a few years, they started coming as guests with my sister and her partner, and they'd come for a week, and they loved it there. They totally loved Tassajara. So, and they could kind of see they'd come from summer to summer, and I was getting more and more responsibility, and that was something that they could relate to that, Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I don't think they ever came to the Zendo really. They didn't like that. They weren't there for practice. They were just there for to see me, and then they would have a wonderful vacation.
It's really hard to find a better vacation than Tassajara, as a visitor.
Yeah.
So you, when you ordained, was that a emotionally relevant, resonant experience for you, or was it just more of the same? Was it a big deal getting ordained for you?
In some ways it felt like a big deal, and in some ways it felt like, I was totally into this yesterday, and I'm totally into this today. Mm-hmm. And that didn't really change. Like my feeling, my sense of commitment, my sense of connection to the practice and to Reb and to the vows didn't change really. Mm-hmm. But I did appreciate that I had new kinds of accountability to the tradition, to the forms of practice, and to the community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so at what point of this did you meet your wife or start a relationship?
We met in 1998 at Tassajara. She came for her first practice period, and we just had a friendship. We had a kind of developing friendship for a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere around a year and a half, we started having we started really falling in love. Mm-hmm. And that was actually, we started falling in love about a few months after I was ordained as a priest.
Oh, interesting.
And so then,
maybe it was the shaved head.
And so we just let that get deeper and deeper and deeper, and then but didn't have a physical relationship, and then decided after I'd been ordained for a year that we would begin our relationship. And with Reb, he wanted, people to just do priest training for these first 5 years, not start new relationships. So I kind of stopped wearing priest robes for a little over a year while we just needed our time to starting our relationship.
Was Reb? How did Reb take this?
I think he experienced some pain of disappointment. But I think I think also, and I think I don't think he was happy about it. and I think and then I think as it turned out, I think he could deeply appreciate, Sarah and our relationship. And,
right. I mean, it seems like the way you guys led into it was pretty wholesome,
We tried to be open and honest about it throughout the whole process, and after about a year, I was we started our relationship in January of 2000, and then we finished some time at Tassajara, then took some time away from Tassajara, which is something that Reb and other teachers often recommended for couples, because some couples would do very well at Tassajara, but then when they left, they become different people in the world, and the relationship wouldn't work. So we kind of left just to make sure that this still made sense.
You went to one of the other practice centers.
Well, we actually left. We just went and stayed with family.
Oh, really? How long was this?
For 3 months, and just with my family and with Sarah's family.
Was this your longest break from residential training?
Yeah. Through that, and so I left Tassajara, so I left San Francisco Zen Center. That was our longest break. Yeah, and then came back to Tassajara the next January, and I was Reb's assistant. And one day in February, he was like, let's go clear the leaves out of the creek. And so we got on rain boots, and we're in the creek. It's like freezing, and just moving all these leaves that have gotten stuck around the rocks in the creek. And it was kind of this wonderful, kind of crazy activity. And my hands were completely numb, and we kind of came out of the water, and Reb said, well, if you'd like to start, wearing your robes again, you can do that. And it was a really intimate moment.
Well, that's great. So eventually, you'd moved away from San Francisco prior to transmission. Is that right?
Yes.
And what led to that decision?
I think I could have lived at San Francisco Zen Center for quite a few more years, but my partner Sarah, she needed to leave, I think. And I think also so our daughter was born at we were living at Tassajara, and she was born in this little place called Jamesburg, which is kind of on the other side of the mountain. Just because it was something complicated with the birth.
That little house there.
Yeah, she was born at that little house because just in case there was complications, we were much easier to get to a hospital. But then basically after she was 6 weeks old, we went back into Tassajara. I was director at the time. And we spent the first year and a half of our daughter's life all living together as a family at Tassajara. And then we went to Green Gulch for 2 years, and then back to Tassajara for one last practice period. And I think there was kind of a complex of things happening. But I think so in some ways there was kind of a tension of how to give our lives completely to community and to fully be a family. And I think Sarah ended up feeling like she really wanted to kind of feel like she could just prioritize family and not have to feel like she was pulling away from community, or that there was some kind of tension. And so that we left San Francisco Zen Center. And but I did not have a feeling like that I was leaving Reb or leaving my practice or training with Reb. So I did sessions with him, and then he would have priest meetings once a week, and I went to many priest meetings.
These are in person.
What was that?
These are in person.
Yes, this is all happening. This is before anything was on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then about maybe 3 years or 4 years before Dharma transmission, Reb spoke to me and Susan. I ordained with Susan as a priest. So we were like a little priest group. And then we had a series of meetings, just the three of us leading up to transmission.
So he gave you a couple of years notice it was coming.
Yeah. And he likes to do there's certain study that's actually the most formal study that I think he does. He does like to do formal study of the Dharma transmission texts before the ceremony. So we did a very thorough study, like going a word by word, line by line study together.
Was it almost like a book group the way he runs it?
Well,
like
it was
would you like read and then come together and discuss and then read, or is it more one-on-one?
It was kind of like it was the three of us. I mean, the first thing we did was copy the whole text by hand.
Oh, okay.
And then we came together and we went through it line by line together. We'd read it and talk about it, read, talk. And and it's a commentary, I think by Banjin Dotan, on the transmission documents. And so it's also a way of studying the transmission documents, each detail. And so and then part of it also is some ritual training. And so so I think it's something he's done with as a kind of long series of meetings with probably most of the people he's done transmission with.
How did you make a living once you left Zen Center?
I kind of piece things together, but kind of like one thing was I was kind of the administrator for the Soto Zen Buddhist Association.
Okay.
And then also I started teaching.
Paid position?
It was a paid position, not a big salary, but it helped. And then also started teaching at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. And then Sarah and I would also regularly teach classes and give talks and so on. And then Sarah and I became the teachers at Stone Creek.
And that was a paid position.
Yes, and that had a.
So you were able to make your living pretty directly from the Dharma then.
Pretty directly. I think we've always needed like extra help or extra support, which we've had in the form of like basically my grandma left me money, that we've been able to rely on to kind of do live as a family.
That's a great gift.
Very appreciative.
And that actually, a little bit of digression here if it's okay. I was talking to someone recently at how the ability to practice deeply like that in some ways is you do from a position of privilege, right?
Yes.
Like when I was in my 20s, I both lived in a monastic environment, Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, and I started like at the time what we called a .com startup, and both of those were risky, in terms of like opportunity cost and fallout and all that kind of stuff. But, it never crossed my mind not to do it, that it wasn't worth the risks of either. And largely that's because, I come from like not very high upper middle class, but technically upper middle class, where like if things fell apart, I had somewhere to go, and I had, at no point did I ever have to worry about my survival, or even like comfort, I always had a fallback solution. And I think, and people talk about lack of diversity in practice, and I think that's a factor, frankly.
I think so. There's some like there are like economic barriers. I mean, the ways in which Tassajara, when I went there, it was a nice situation in that, like, you had to pay $70 for your first week. And then you could stay for the rest of the summer and then do practice periods. And then you'd go on a stipend. And so you didn't need a lot of savings to live there but
what happens if you're 5 years into it and you decide it's not for you?
Yes.
And you don't have a family to fall back on. You've just you've just lost some of the most productive career building years you have. I mean, there's risk.
You've not built up savings. Yeah. And maybe you started a family while you were there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real thing, you know, and it's not new to our time. If you look back at, you know, this book I have called The Five Mountain System, you know, it was the Five Mountain System in Japan.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, and they talk about the sociology of Zen during medieval times. And you basically couldn't be an abbot unless you came from money, you know, just because it was just too expensive, you know, and like, so it's not a new phenomenon, you know, and then maybe in a lot of ways, one of the biggest leaps we could make with Zen in our newer generations is making it more inclusive to people that don't come from at least middle class, you know.
Yeah, I think it's like I think making making more inclusive, you know, and making a place that's really welcoming across race and class and age and gender and sexuality, and which I think is, you know, a lot of work, you know, for the people that are, you know, for teachers and priests and communities. Like there's a lot of work to do, and I think there's also a kind of kind of like one model of what people might approach going to a Zen center would be like a yoga class. Like I'm going to pay a fee of like $10 or $15. I'm going to get this class, and then I'm going to leave. It's a transaction and it's done. And I kind of feel like actually what I want to offer is like spiritual life, and like this is a religious place, and so and yeah, and so I'm hopeful that that's the kind of feeling we could build together, and that you know, and that kind of support could then become like, you know, flow, that the support of the Dharma could flow from this feeling of like, I'm not doing this to get things, or, you know, but we're caring for a spiritual religious life together. And this is like kind of the most important thing in our lives.
And I think expanding on that, one way you make, this is kind of my soapbox a little bit, so sorry, but you know, I think one way you make Zen more accessible to people is you have paths to being a teacher that are completely compatible with not having to drop out of society for 10 years or 15 years, you know, because then people aren't having to take this enormous risk with their lives, you know, and so, you know, I know you were like the administrator of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, and if you look at the requirements, you basically have to, you can only satisfy them having taken that risk, I think, in a lot of ways. Maybe it's I haven't looked at it for a long time.
But I tried to. I think it's very much a factor. I think if you look at their requirements, I think you might only have to. You don't have to. It definitely doesn't require you dropping out of your life for 10 years. It does require dropping out of your life for cumulatively, like I think 3 to 6 months. Plus years and years of sesshin, all of which are still like economic questions, you know,
right?
For people.
You know, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, leaving for Haratsu, and you know, and then your car breaks down, like that's it. You might be homeless, you know.
Yeah, you know, there's and 3-month ongo for some people is not a possibility, right? I mean, it's just like so they did try to.
And I'm not trying to pick on San Francisco, I think it's a great organization. I didn't mean to pick on it. It's just, since you're the administrator there, I use it as an example, you know.
You know, it's a really dynamic question of, I mean, well, so actually I did that. I was administrator for SCBA from like 2007 through 2013. So I haven't been, although then I was on the board, but anyway, I'm not officially involved with SCBA except as a member. But yeah, I think it's a really, a really important question about and how. But I guess I feel like one of the most. I feel like there's sort of the logistical level of how the tradition will become more inclusive. think there's also just the level of like teachers, communities, individuals like really doing the work themselves, of looking at their conditioning around class and race and gender, and really doing deep work. Just doing, and we have this practice to support looking at conditioning. So it's like we have this practice. Let's apply to this conditioning. And so some people write this off as like it's political. I don't think it's political. I just think it's like this is like the suffering of our culture and our lives. This is collective karma and collective suffering. And for me, it's like, yeah, I want to study how I've been impacted and shaped by white supremacy culture, by patriarchy, and so on. Because in classism, because these are profound. And I feel like we, the model of conditioning is like we have been deeply shaped. And I think there's something about the consciousness of American individualism is completely oblivious to how deeply shaped we are by our conditioning.
I firmly believe, there's personal conditioning where, your teacher told you you were worthless, and then that became part of your belief system, right? But then there's like cultural conditioning. Yeah. And I think Zen can help a little bit with personal conditioning. Like, I don't think it cures it, but I think it can illuminate it.
Yeah.
Right? But cultural conditioning, it's so hard to have any objectivity to it. Like, I'm not sure Zen can even touch it unless you explicitly identify it and look at it. Like look at all the, probably what were pretty seriously awake people in Japan in World War II, like extremely right-wing and enthusiastic about the war. It's just like they just couldn't escape their cultural conditioning of their time, and you mentioned, white supremacy. I mean, it's just invisible to, even if someone is a racist, it's just, you're still, it's still part of your reality that you don't even notice, and like, it's, I think it's the hardest conditioning to translate.
I think it's hard. And I feel like this practice is a great support. I mean, like, I don't know how you're going to address it without something like this practice.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, the first step is there needs to be you have to identify it conceptually, right? Yeah. And without that, it doesn't matter how long you practice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's got to be some intention, I think.
Yeah. And that's sort of like the same thing with the teachings too. Like we have teachings of emptiness, and like, in some ways, why do you need a teaching? It's just reality. But yeah, the teaching, like, helps. It gives us direction, and then what combined with the intimacy, that real opening can happen. And I have that same feeling about racialized conditioning. That combined with intimacy, understanding, how this is functioning, and in our culture, there can be illumination and liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel
Yeah. How old are your kids?
Oh, my kids? I have a 20-year-old daughter.
A 2, do you say?
20.
20, you do?
She was the one who was born at Jamesburg and then lived at Tassajara.
So she grew up in Zen then?
Yeah, she grew up in Zen for her first 3.5 years. And then she's always been around these, Zen parents.
Yeah. What's her opinion of Zen? Does she practice, or is she involved at all?
She loves Tassajara. So she wants to go back to Tassajara. She's always happy to be at Tassajara. And that's like kind of where she spent the first 1.5 years of her life. So I think feels this deep connection. Mm-hmm. And she has occasionally engaged in meditation and really appreciated its value. So we don't try to get her to meditate. And so
she didn't pick it up on her own or anything.
She has not taken it up she knows how to do sitting and sometimes does practice, but it's not a daily practice for her. And and who knows, who knows in 5 or 10 years. And we have a good relationship, and she appreciates Zen in some way through us.
People always assume that I'm trying to I'm going to turn my kids into meditators. And they're like, well, what do you do? Like, how do you teach your kids about Buddhism? I'm like, I don't,
Yeah.
If they're interested, they'll ask me,
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like they're very powerful ideas. And I feel like, I don't know if they're for children.
Right. I mean, one thing I will do, if I try to put practice into parenting at all, I do try to say how, like, a lot of how we react to things are based on emotions and habits. And if you pay attention and pay attention to how you feel, you're less likely to get, I'll try to point that out. That's the one area, but I don't use practice words. I don't say like, well, look at your karma. No.
Yeah. And our son is 11, and he's
adopted. Is that what you said?
And he's adopted. Yeah. Yeah. We had a long path from our first child to our adopted child, putting one baby that didn't live and one adoption that basically reversed after 2.5 months.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
The parent wanted them back, or?
Yeah. She was, we could feel she was ambivalent, but she said she wanted to go forth with it. And then she stayed ambivalent. And then after 2.5 months, we basically said, we think you need to decide one way or the other. And that kind of gave her the chance to say she wanted him back. And so,
I mean, it was pretty generous of you to even open that door, because I imagine it was hard.
It was hard, but I think adoption's a very ethically tricky realm, so it's like, and birth parents are some of the often like not treated ethically, so that's something that we felt strongly about.
Does your son, so he grew up kind of away from the temple compared to your daughter, I guess.
Yeah,
so he's a little less immersed in it.
Yeah, he's less immersed. He occasionally likes to do some gasho bowing. If he sees bells and makugyos, he starts playing them right away.
That's great.
But he's not much of a meditator so far. But he likes to say, namaste in a sort of a little tongue in cheek. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Do you? I guess we should probably wrap up here a little bit. Is there anything you want to touch base on, or you want to Zen manifesto?
No, that feels good to me. Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a manifesto in there somewhere.
Do you? If someone's intrigued by your manifestation of Dharma and they wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them?
What would be the best way? I guess send me an email at Charlie. Probably what is my I have a Brooklyn Zen Center email address. Charlie@brooklynzen.org.
Okay. Cool. And can they also like email Brooklyn Zen Center and they'll pass it on to you? Sure.
Yeah. And I'm open to meeting with people online.
Cool. Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for the time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Take good care.
You too.